Hello guys, welcome to Zip Code, and today we are looking at another cup of code. Have you been wondering if or how actually large corporations actually handle large data uh, processing, or if they are doing data migrations, how do they perform that? How do they get to achieve that with a microservices architecture and essentially deliver um, the best possible data migration with the least amount of um, efforts or with high performance and the shortest amount of time. So today we'll be looking at one of the mechanisms or methodologies that used in Spring Boot, and that is called the Spring Batch feature to bulk process huge amounts of data from one, let's say maybe data storage, which is a file in this instance, into a database where we can start using APIs and applications to interact with that particular database. So what you seeing here is the API to view the data in the database, and you will see that it will basically just give us back um, what we have in our database table, and I will show you how we can go about achieving all of this in a few minutes, if you will. So with that being said, let's jump right into the project. First things first, all the artifacts are in the description down below, and that would be the Spring Initializer configuration. I have the link in there. So if you want the same project, you want to follow up on this particular tutorial, just copy that in the description and then paste it into your browser, and then download on this generate over here, and it will give you the same project as I have with all my configurations and the dependencies. And once you're set up there, or if you want the entire project, you can, in the description, there's a project repository link, so please do check that out, and you can get access to the code base. I've set up everything to be a plug and play, so you just clone the repo and then pull it into your IDE, and then you'll be able to run the project. So it's running on H2, it has liquid base, so it will create everything for you. You don't need to create much. And also the CSV file is added into the project resources, so it will be able to be picked up by the class path, and it shouldn't be a problem for you. So the data source, I got that from data list. That's the site where I got some free sample CSV files, and if you do want your own set of files, you can essentially just come here and look for different data sets. You can have customers, people, organizations, leads, products, and you can play around with how the data looks like. So if I click on customers, you'll also see the dataset fields. So these are the fields that are in the CSV file, the different columns, if we want to call it that. So you have index, customer ID, first name, last name, company, city, country, and phone number, phone 1, phone 2, email, subscription date, and website. So these are all the fields that you can play around with, and the fact that it's different data types, you can also see how you can handle that on your side, but we'll go through the code base so that you can see all of this. And let's just go through the application configuration before we jump into the code. So our project is Maven based. We have the language is Java. Spring Boot is 3.4.4, and we always recommend the latest stable version. So you will see this the initializer defaults to the latest stable version. All of the other ones, 5.3, 3.5.0, these are all snapshots, so which means they are not the latest stable as yet. They're still snapshots. So we'll wait for the stable version, and then we will jump into whatever version that is available at that particular time. But for now, this is what we have. Let's jump into the metadata for the project. Group is com.zipcode as per usual, and then the artifact is batch microservice. and then it is a demo project for Spring Boot tutorial purposes. Then the packaging is jar. That should suffice for what we are trying to achieve here. And then the Java version is 17. I think we will be starting to move to 21 because we've been using 17 for quite a while now. So we'll move these to 21 so that we are on a better version of an LTS, if I can put it that way. Let's jump into the dependencies. So we have Lombok, just to make sure that we have boilerplate code. We don't need to write any access modifiers, and those are typical methods that we can annotate using Lombok. So it allows us a shorthand of those particular methods over there. Then we have Spring Boot DevTools. So we want to make sure that we have a live reload of our code. So if we make any changes on our code and we want to test those in real time, we don't need to bounce the server manually. It will just do that on its own. Then we have Spring Data JPA. So we will be persisting our batch records into the database. So we will be interacting with the DB via JPA. And then Spring Batch itself, which is the main man for this particular tutorial. So Spring Batch, we want to handle a bulk data set processing. So we'll have a number of transactions over here, and we will we'll process those in chunks where we'll handle, maybe we'll give it volumes to say handle maybe 3 at a time or 10 records at a time, or whatever size that you prefer on your side, and you'll see this in action. So the Spring Batch will give us that flexibility to also skip on certain conditions, retry on certain conditions, and we can also have custom exceptions that we want to catch and retry for, or skip in that particular configuration. And then we also have Spring Web. Spring Web, this is one that we will be using to create our REST API, which is the Postman endpoint over here, to give us the data after we have created it into or persisted into the database from the CSV file. And then the next dependency is S2 database. So going forward, I'll be using S2 database simply because I want to make your life easy in terms of pulling the code and running it. So if there's any tutorial that will have database interaction, I'll be using S2 for the lightweight, and I'll also add Liquibase so that you are able to basically pull the code and run it and at least see what it does. If there are APIs there, you can transact in those APIs and have an easy project setup to follow through with the code. And that's about it for the configuration. Let's jump into the code. Right, so we know where the data set, we got the data set, we have everything, we have our project. So once you pull the project from initializer over here, once you generate it, it will download a zip file, and then you just unzip that, or otherwise you can just pull the repo from our GitHub. Once that is set up, just on a tangent here, guys, one thing that I want to highlight is I would really appreciate if you like and subscribe on the channel, and you also share these tutorials for more engagement in the channel, and also it will assist me to afford a IntelliJ license, because I can't. Right now I'm on the community edition, which suffice for the tutorials, but it would be nice to use IntelliJ more going forward. I think I'm more drawn into this particular user interface as opposed to Spring Tool Suite. I've nothing against Spring Tool Suite. It still does what it needs to do, and I'm happy with it. But if you look at the interface, you will see that they can do better. They can do better. So I put it on dark mode. The colors are just all over the show, and I don't. It doesn't align with my type of styling. So, but IntelliJ, it's much more subtle, fewer colors. It's easy to read, easy on the eye, and it's much more meaningful. So if you would like and subscribe, it goes a long way. Really appreciate it. I will do more of this, and I'll get to do them in IntelliJ, which will be nice for me and for you to see and read the code as well. So that being said, let's jump right into the code. So first things first, we want to see the resources. Let's start on the application properties. We won't do the POM because everything in the POM is what I highlighted on the dependencies. So the application properties has port number that will be running the port is 8080. Application name is batch microservice. Database or data source, you will see that we have a driver, H2 driver, and we are using H2 memory database. Those on exit. I want to set it to false, and then we have username, password, which is the credentials, default credentials over there. Then DLL auto update, and then properties. Hibernate dialect is H2 dialect. Show SQL true just to see all the database transactions that we are doing. And then Liquibase, we enable Liquibase to true. And the changelog file is in our class part db changelog folder. And you will see we have the changelog master over there. Clear checksum, that's true, so that we don't have checksum validation issues. And then we have a driver class, which is the same as the data source config. So all of these are basically the data source configs. So we use those. Default schema is public. Right, and that's that for the application properties. The CSV, if you want to see how it looks like, this is how the CSV looks like. It has the first line is the fields or the columns. So you'll have index, customer ID, first name, last name, company, city, all these fields that I've highlighted on the data set in database list. So this line, you will see where we actually tell the batch step to actually skip this particular line because it's the header line. Or if you have, let's say, multiple lines that have headers, you can just skip those lines and then it will start from the line after that. So you will see where we do that to ignore the header row on the data set. All right, and then in the master file, this is just a changelog, and everything is within this changelog.xml, which will be just one table, so it's nothing complicated. As I mentioned, I only took the customer data, so this will be the customer table, and in these customers, you'll have the index, which is a big int, or a long in the entity class, so you will see that. And then you have all the other ones are string except for the subscription date. So the subscription date is a date, just like that, and everything else is a string, as you can see. And they are nullable just in case the file, because we can handle all the null checks in the business logic. I'll show you that in a few. But for now, we just set everything as nullable, which is fine. It should suffice for what we want. Right. Let's go into the application. So the main class is we have the enabled JPA repositories because we'll have database transactions on that on the application, and then we have Spring Boot application so that we can auto configure any bin that is available in our application properties. It can be auto-configured, or any bin definition that we want can also give us the default bin definition for it. So you'll see that in the batch configuration, I do use a number of default bin definitions over there. And then let's start on the entity class. So in the entity class, or let me just highlight this. Let me actually close here so you can see the packages that we have. So we have the configurations package, controller package, entity repository, and then service packages respectively. So if we go into the entity. Actually, let's start on the entity so that you see how everything looks like. So this is the entity class, which is the database table that will be persisting the data to. And you have your customer, and you can see we're using Lombok for all our access modifiers and some Jakarta persistent annotations for database to make Spring aware that this is a database object, so it needs to treat it as such. So we have a builder so that we can instantiate a new instance of the class and set all the parameters that we want. And then we have add data to be able to access the data as in when we prefer. We have no args constructor, we have all args constructor, and then we have add entity annotation, and then we have add table with the customer, which is the table name over there. So we do implement serializable so that the data can be serialized on in transit, and then we have the add ID annotation to indicate that this is then the ID field in the table, and then we have the generated auto identity. So this will auto increment at all times. And then we have our customer ID, first name, last name, city, country, phone, email, and subscription date. And please take note that this object here does not have all the fields that we have in the file, right? And that is very important because if you try reuse this object, it will fail, because when batch tries to map the fields that are coming from the batch file into this particular object, if you're using it, it will then have some issues regarding those particular fields. So what we are using instead is a DTO, which is a data transfer object. You will see over here, we have the DTO and customer DTO. It looks the same way as the customer entity class looks like, but this DTO has everything that is in our CSV file. So all these fields are in the CSV file. So if I go to data build list, you will see that you have index, customer ID, first company, city, right? And all of these fields are actually, what is this thing doing? Are actually here. So you have index, customer ID, first name, last name, company, city, country, phone 1, phone 2, email, subscription date, and website. So we have all of these, and we also have the Lombok annotation for the builder and the data and the constructors respectively. So now that we have our data models, what we need to do is to now have a conversation with Spring Batch to say we were trying to process or trying to read data from a particular object. What do we do? So what we call that is the item processor. So all the records in a let's say in the data set will be an item, if you can call them that, right? And then that item, we need to process it. So what we do is we'll create a new class. That class will be the data set. So you can use that to say product item processor, customer item processor, or leads item processor. And then it implements a interface, and that particular interface is a functional interface. It's coming from Spring Batch itself. And then you will see that it has an input and it has an output parameter over there. So the input will be the customer DTO. This is the data that we expect to come in from the batch file. And then we have the output, which is the entity, the customer entity object that we want to return back into our transaction to persist into the database, and you will see where we do that. So over here, we then override, which is if you go to the functional interface, you will see that it has the input and output, and it has the process, add not null item. So it requires the input item to be there, or otherwise it will throw that particular exception accordingly. So let's go back into our concrete item processor. So this is customer item processor. You'll see in the process, we take in the customer DTO, which is item, and we throw a runtime exception. We just log this to customer item processor process called for ID and the name. So here we'll get the ID, which is the index, and then the customer name just printed out on the logs. And then we return a customer entity object, and you will see that's what we that's what we return over here. And we use the builder to basically set all of these fields to our customer entity object. And you'll see on the subscription date, we do a data transform. Because everything else is a string, this is where we actually do a transform to say the date, we'll get the date as a string, but we want to pass it into this particular format and set it into the subscription date field. So that's just to show that you can then process the data as much as you want here. If you want to perform some calculations before setting the data into the database, do some validations, throw validations. If there's exceptions, log those exceptions, and you can then push maybe that particular transaction into a failed state or whatever. But this is where you just transform that data into a object that makes sense, right? And then now that we have our customer item processor, what we need is the batch processor for this particular item. So now we have the item processor. Now we need the batch processor for that, right? So let's go into the configuration, batch configuration. And in here, we have a number of pins that you will see. So we have a configuration class, which is a batch configuration. And in the batch configuration, the first pin that we have is the flat file item reader, right? So here we actually read the file that we'll be retrieving the data from. And we have our type of customer DTO, right? We're reading customer DTO, right? So that keep that in mind. And then the name of this particular reader is customer item reader. The resource is from our class path, which is customers 100. And also there are larger files than this. There is 1,000, I think 100,000. So if you go to data bill list, let me just check and scroll down. Yeah, so you'll see there's 100, there's 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, 500,000, a million, and I think this is 2 million. Crazy amounts. Yeah, but essentially you can throw it as many records as you want, put as the bulk that you want, and basically try to break the service to just make sure that it performs the way that you want and it doesn't feel the heat if you up the numbers like that. So for testing purposes or for these tutorial purposes, 100 should suffice for us. And then lines to skip. This is again, this goes back to what I was mentioning when we were looking at the CSV file. So if you see here, this is the header row, and we're saying skip this line, so we're only skipping line 1. So lines to skip is only 1. Then the delimiter, it will basically pick up the delimiter based on the file that you sent it. This is just to make life easy for us, or otherwise you can specify the delimiter if it's some sort of a special delimiter other than your commas and things like that. So that's for one. And then on the field names, so these names is for the different fields or the different columns in that particular data set. We have index, customer ID, first name, last name, etc. and all of the other fields that we want. And also on the names, please make sure you have all these, because files are just like that. They use either you know what you're reading on the file or you don't know what you're reading on the file. So if you don't put the field, it just assumes that your structure doesn't look like what I'm sending you, so you'll have an issue there. So just align that, align those names and make sure that they are as according to the file as possible. And then you'll have the target, and again, the target is the customer DTO, and then we build this particular object, and then we return this reader into a bin. So we'll have that bin available within our scope. And then the next bin that we have is custom item processor. So we'll have the processor, and you see here new customer item processor, which will be a bin available for us to basically transact on batch and retrieve all the data from the CSV and then run it to the processing that we want, essentially. Then the next one is JDBC batch item writer, right? So here we are now defining the database instruction that we want to perform on these particular records. So you'll see that on the writer, we are taking a data source. Because we already defined the data source in the application.yaml, this will basically pick up the default data source configuration or properties and then use that instance here. So we'll just use the default bin definition for the data source as according to the application properties. And then we'll return the batch item writer, which is, again, we have the writer builder, and this is customer. Because this is the database object, we are using customer entity object. And then we have our SQL definition here, which is an insert statement, insert into customer. All of these particular fields that we have in index, customer ID, first name, last name, country, city, phone, email, and all the other fields, right? And then the values will be all of these parameters as according to the data set that we have, which is customer ID, first name, last name, country, city, phone, email, and subscription date. Then we have our data source, which is the default data source. Then we just have that bin mapped to say that this bin has been mapped into our builder, and then we build that particular JDBC item writer bin, right? So now we have a transaction to the database established. We are happy with that. We continue with our bin definition. Now we are specifying the job to execute all of these that we are doing. So here we'll import user job, which in our case should be import customer, but that's fine. Then we have our job repository, we have our step, and we have job completion notification listener. So this job completion notification listener is actually this class over here. So if you're wondering why I did this one then went all the way up, it's because of this particular job definition here. So you will see what this does. Let's just see the step definition first so that you understand what all of these will do. So on the step definition, you'll see it's a bin also, and we have the job repository for our specific job. So we'll have all these job, batch job, right, repository to execute the job that we define up there. And then we have the data source transaction manager. This is to ensure that our database transactions are held within the default transaction manager. So we'll use that default bin. And then we have our file item reader, which is another bin that we just spoke about at the top. Then we have a custom item processor, which is what we highlighted at the top, the batch item writer of the customer, and you see this is the writer. So all these are bins that we have spoken about and have highlighted above. And then on the step builder itself, over here you'll see the step builder, the step name, step one, job repository that we'll use to actually execute this step. And then we have the input to the step builder is the customer DTO. The output is the customer entity, and we chunk this into a chunk size of 3. So on each iteration, it will read 3 rows or 3 entries in our CSV file, and then it will basically transact on those. So we pass in the transaction manager for our data source, and then we use the item reader that we have, the flat file item reader, and we pass in the reader that we have, and the processor is the processor that we defined over here, custom item processor, that will basically take the after the reader has picked up the records, it will send them to the processor, and processor will process each record and transform it into the customer entity class, and then go and write that into the database using the JDBC batch item writer. So then it will write that particular record into the database over here. So we then build this step builder, which will execute all of the batch. So everything in batch essentially happens in this one guy over here. Everything else around it is to support this transaction being successful. So this step, when it executes, all of these other definitions we have here, they should already be predefined and available for it to use to execute this particular step over here, right? So now we have a step, we go to the job itself. And on the transaction manager, you will see that this is the pin for the transaction manager. So we're using platform transaction manager. This is the transaction manager. We pass in the data source, and again, it will use the default data source config, and then it will return a new data source transaction manager, and it will use it over here for our database transactions. And that's how that definition is set up. And then we have all the pins defined. The batch itself is going to be executed over here. So again, this is the job repository, the default job repository. We have the step that we just spoken about now, and we have the completion notification listener. So let's go and, okay, let me finish this, and then we'll go to the notification listener. So in here, we have the job builder, which is the job that will execute. And in this instance, the job will execute at runtime. So whenever we start the application to run, then by default, it does restart after a few minutes. But yeah, there's no like a schedule on it as yet. You can actually use, let's say, scheduler. You can enable scheduler and then put a cron time on it, and then handle that job execution on that particular schedule instead of having it run on its own at application startup. So for this tutorial, we're just highlighting how you can set up batch and execute it. And if you want to see how to implement schedule or with Quartz, we do have Quartz microservice in our Git repository. Please do check that out. If you want to automate all of this, you can just use Quartz and then pull the configurations of this particular service into with the Quartz microservice. You can be able to automate all of these. So please do check that out. I'll add that into the description as well so that you can access that tutorial and that repository. So with all that being said, now we are going into the job builder. So the job builder will import customer job, and we'll pass in the job repository so that we have our job in the repository. We have the listener. So this listener will basically await for this job to execute. So after it's done, it will then notify this guy that, oh, job completion notification. So that's essentially what it is. And the start of this job is basically this step one. So it will execute this step one for it to perform what it needs to perform, and then we build this particular job and return it into a bin, and it will basically trigger on startup. So on the listener, once everything is ran on the step, it has read all the data and it has written all the data into the database. It then goes into this job completion notification listener, which implements a job execution listener. So when a job executes, we have a job execution listener to await any of these particular um, um, completion notifications. And in here, you will see that I have a dependency injection of the customer repository. Let me actually run you through the customer repository quickly. It's going to be a quick one. It's not a huge definition. So you'll see we have add repository to specify that this is a database facing object. And again, it has the iCustomer repository and it extends the JPA repository. And we have our customer and the ID is long. And that's what we have because we are going to be performing one crude operation. Basically, we don't need, the generic crude operations, we don't need to specify some custom methods over here. We will just, the crude um, available operation should be enough for what we want. So this definition is as plain as it can be. And then in here, we just plug that repository and then we say override after job. So this is after job has executed. And then we basically pass in the job execution. So in the job execution.status, if that status is completed, then we log info of batch completed, and then we basically print out all of these. And I actually can comment this block out to say don't print any of this out. We don't need it because we are going to use the API to read the data that we just persisted in the DB. So let's just go do that so that I don't want the logs to have all of this data that you see over here. So this log is all coming from this line here, which prints everything that was written and completed in that particular job. So now that I've commented out that piece, let me just go, let me just bounce this guy. Well, actually, it's supposed to bounce on its own because it has dev tools, but this machine is taking its vacation. So let me restart this. The job will execute and it will just have the batch completed at the end. And then we can call this controller instead of this print out. We will then call the controller here, which is trigger controller, which trigger controller is fine. Doesn't matter. The annotation here is our address controller, and we have our request mapping of batch, and you will see we have our dependency injection of the customer repository over here, and then we have one get mapping, and that returns a response entity of object, and we say view batch data, and we return an OK and retrieve all the data from the customer repository. And you will see that our logs are actually happy now. We have batch completed and all our printouts for all the methods, and you will see the last ID is 100 and the name of that particular customer is Clarence, and everything is completed. So that's good. So if we call this get API, we should get all of this data because we're not filtering anything. So coming back here, application localhost 8080 /batch, we send that, and you go and retrieve the data for us, and we see voila, we got a 200 OK, and we still have the data. If you are not sure or not convinced, we can actually clear response and we send the request again, and it comes back with all the data is still intact. So if you scroll all the way down, the last entry should be Clarence. So the first name is Clarence and the index is 100 because our data set has 100 entries in there. So all the data is there, customer ID, first name, last name, email, and subscription date. And I'm happy. And I hope this tutorial was helpful to you. I hope you do like and subscribe. We have more Spring features to explore. We have more Spring features to talk about. If you have any questions, please pop them in the comment section down below. I'll follow through and see what issues you experience and we can address them together. If you have issues with any of your code base, maybe you're working on a project, working on a feature, and you're finding it difficult to resolve it, I've resolved a number of issues where viewers and subscribers actually pop their questions on the comments and they tell me that they've been struggling with an issue for a week or a couple of days and what can they do in that scenario, and I would basically respond in that particular comment so that not only that person can see it but other people can also see it. So if you're struggling with something, please do share it. You're learning, I'm learning, and everyone gets to have a solution and we can all learn together. It's a journey for all of us and not just me or you. Until next time, for now, cheers.